Welcome to our Screencraft Works cross-border careers talk on learning edit basics for virtual workflows. Thank you also to Sarah Patt Associates for supporting this round of talks. We're delighted to welcome Nigel Honey from Ability Post-Production Academy.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Rebecca and Elizabeth to inviting me today. I've been editing for 27 years now. So I started as an editor, and the reason I set up the Ability Academy is I was told from a young age that because of my disability, an invisible disability called bipolar, that I wouldn't work as a film editor. And if you tell me something that I can't do, I go off and do it. So that's what I did. I did films for Aberdeen, Cannes, Raindance, Edinburgh International, and Berlin and BAFTA. And now we teach all over the UK and also all over the world, basically, via remote technology, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So we're an avid learning partner, the only one in Scotland that's both online and face-to-face. And we've done courses for ITV, Emmerdale, BBC, Mama Youth, and Netflix. So let's talk about remote editing. So remote working has become a touchstone for professional workers in all sectors, but especially with post-production and especially for video editors. So it's been a fact of life for some time since COVID. And however, for experienced media professionals, there are many barriers to efficiency. So creating an optimized remote video workflow is one of the skills to master, whatever the scale of the production or project. This means using remote devices such as hard drives within the cloud, which is basically virtual hard drives, such as things like LucidLink, Google Drive, these kind of things, and working with what is known as proxies or transcodes, which are basically copies of your files, but at a lower resolution. So it's much easier for them to be processed by your computer. What's very important with remote production and post-production is to set up and plan for these. So a key strategy here is to establish at the start which digital tools we're going to use for the project, and to ensure that communications are set up correctly from the start. It's often a fact-finding mission to scope out which tools, if any, are already being used by the productions. Establishing specific communication channels is priority, and might just be setting up a WhatsApp group, especially for international projects and mobile teams in the film, or, for example, sharing different Slack channels with external productions. So visibility through the whole production is a key consideration here, so that any downstream software or hardware requirements are captured and managed in advance. So what you don't want to be doing is at the first day of production think, oh, we're on different versions of the software and that you can't communicate. So it's good to get all these things in sets and start before you actually start the post-production. So digitizing the planning stage is also vital, using any number of process management tools. These can be things like Trello or Asana, which will ensure that workflows can be planned out early, bottlenecks spotted from some way off, and that the correct people are in place and aware of the progress. As I found out, not every company uses Zoom. So you assume that in terms of communication, you'll be using Zoom. Some companies, some corporate companies don't actually let you have Zoom. So you might have to use Teams, or you may have to use other networking devices to communicate between yourself and the producer. An example of this is my last edit that I did. I was in Scotland. The producer and director were in London, and the edit suite that I was actually controlling, the actual Avid I was controlling, was in Brighton. So it shows you this changing world of remote production now. So just because I'm here doesn't mean that the rushes or some of the assets are in the cloud or could be like in the States. So what's happened now is there's more productions where different areas are working together. So I might be doing the editing in Scotland, but someone else might be doing the graphics or the motion graphics, say in America or in Europe or somewhere like that. So this is what's changing now. So another thing to be aware of is agreeing and configuring software at an early age. It's also to have visibility of hardware throughout the projects. once the raw files, so the actual captured files are captured, it's useful to ensure that either a hardware agnostic solution is in place to ease the collaboration, or that all editors and producers are using the same hardware or software. So, for example, on my last film that I was working, both I was using Premiere and the director was using Premiere. So what would happen? He would do an assemble and then give that to me so that I could then do the fine cut. And also, if you're on Avid, make sure that you're on the same version, because it will save a lot of problems with that. Applying recent updates to nonlinear editing systems is a good idea, not only for ease of collaboration point of view, but also security and risk exposure. Operating in a hybrid environment, which means that some of the production may be done at the base or at the post house, whereas some of it may be done remotely in your own house. So what's happening now is this thing called a hybrid model, where I could be working remotely at home, but I also may need to go into a facility house to work on the online. So there's this new way of hybrid working, which a lot of productions have started up. Another thing is, even for live productions now, rather than them actually being at the location, a lot of it can be done remotely, and they can control the cameras and the editing suites remotely now. So this can cause some issues. So basically, communication is key. For many productions, using parallel filming units at different locations simultaneously to reduce operating costs while keeping the creative teams remote. So it is being done at the moment. There's considerable benefits to this model, but only if the communication is seamless. If there's a variation in lighting styles or camera settings across locations, for example, then this can cause problems. For example, the cost of reshooting can be a real consideration. While that coordination might seem feasible to begin with, the challenge increases exponentially with the number of units in operation. So often, sometimes there might be 3 or 4 units, and all this material's coming back to you. So the first thing I would do is create proxies or transcodes, so I'm not working at the high 4K, 5K resolutions. I'm working of copies on it, but at lower resolution, so it's easier to work with. The other key benefit of remote video editing is different solutions can be used. Encrypted videos can be streamed directly from cameras or edit stations to editors offset. This allows for a large group, up to 20 people, to be part of the action in real time without needing to be actually present or on location. One of the major factors that productions are really concerned about is security in terms of the rushes that they're doing. So no matter what the scale of production, security should be paramount, not only the security from outside threats or bad actors, but in terms of IP theft or industrial espionage, because also internal mistakes and slip-ups can result in lost or overwritten versions. So one of the common methods to improve security is using remote video editing using what is known as a VPN, or a virtual private network, to encrypt the actual data. The VPNs encrypt your internet traffic and disguise your online identity. That makes it difficult for third parties to track and identify your data. The other issue is obviously bandwidth. When you're working remotely, bandwidth becomes a major issue. So this is why a lot of the times I'm working at lower resolution proxy files, which are a low quality version of the video file, which can work even if you've got an old computer. So why do we use proxy files? Proxy files are transcoded versions of the full-size version, so they can be edited and manipulated more easily, even with older desktops with CPUs and GPUs, which are basically the processing units or the graphic cards. This allows for offline editing workflows where a remote video editor can work entirely offline with minimal local storage requirements, and then they relink back to the original big files at the end. The downside to this is that you need to transcode the original files, which can take time, and this needs to be scored as transcoded versions only. Not only do local files need to be stored securely, they may need to be encrypted as well. They need to be labeled and organized, otherwise it can be a nightmare. So you must make sure that you label your clips correctly. Fortunately, most popular nonlinear editors such as Premiere and Avid can do a lot of this heavyweight lifting here. So here's a step-by-step demo of how you can do this. So when you bring in the rushes, you can create proxies on Premiere. You select all the footage that you want to create, then you right click and select proxies and create proxies. So I'm just going to quickly show you how you do that. This is Adobe Premiere. This is version 2022. So what I've got here is a timeline, and in here I've got my rushes. Now what I can do is if I select my rushes and right click, look, I can select proxy files and then create proxies. And what that will then do is create smaller files so that I can edit with. And then when I've finished that, I can reconnect to the full resolution. Now, the clever thing about Premiere is you've got this button here where you can go between your proxy files and the original footage. So it will know when you're working on your low resolution footage and when you're working with your high resolution footage. So that I use quite a lot. That's really, really useful. You can create H.264 or QuickTime files, and then you can actually edit with them. And then when the exports are done, all the files will automatically link back to Adobe Premiere. So what you often do is you use another piece of software called Media Encoder to create the proxy files. And then what happens, it creates these files, and then you can use them for your editing. Now, like I say, you've got the ability to switch between your proxy files and your original files in Premiere. So once you've got your proxy files have been created, you can then turn them on. You can then head over to your program or record window and navigate to where it says play, pause, forward, etc., the buttons. And then you'll see this plus icon. You can press the plus icon and you can drag the toggle proxy button onto your work bar. So now you'll notice when you click on the toggle proxy bar, you can switch between your proxy files and the original media. You'll notice that your proxies have been turned on. Scrubbing through your timeline will then be smooth and lag free. Whereas when it's high resolution, it sometimes has problems to play back in real time or even to scrub through the timeline. And the great thing is, best of all, Adobe Premiere Pro lets you work with proxy videos, but then export with the high resolution files. So it's a win-win. How do you link to existing proxy files? Well, with some cameras, for example, you can create video proxies directly in the camera itself when you record them. If your camera does this, you can try this out because it will save a lot of time. So what you can do is you can right click on your selected footage, again, select the proxy files and then select attach proxies. So that's if you've already created them. And then you can select the folder that they're actually in. So how do you send proxy files? Video proxies will reduce the size of your raw or big 4K resolution video, which is better for video editing and remote collaboration. Imagine the time it would take if everyone in a production team had to send, receive, and work with the raw files exclusively. It's much easier to share the video proxies and link back to the original files at the end. It's faster to do this than work on the original media files. But there's a catch. Proxy files still can be quite big. So if you're working on a 30-minute 4K 60 frames per second file, you won't miraculously produce a 100 megabyte video. There is a piece of software which is called MASV or MAS that lets you fast and easily secure your way to work with large files with teammates and collaborators. With MAS, you can select the proxy file, share the raw footage, production files, and any high-res assets anywhere in the world. It can deliver up to 15 terabytes per file over the cloud at maximum speed. And if you go to the website, you can have a look and you can get a free trial of it. What about working in Avid? So again, it's similar. It's called transcodes in Avid. So in Premiere, it's called proxy files. In Avid, it's called transcodes. And what you do is when you go into your source browser, you can either link the footage or you can import it. So linking, what that does is links back to the camera cards. However, if you then take that camera card away, what's going to happen is it's all going to go offline. So what you do, a lot of people do, is they transcode the footage from the camera card so they have a copy of it so they can actually edit with it. The other way you can do it is just import the rushes directly. But again, you need to select the resolution that you want to bring it into. Make sure you set up your bins correctly. So decide upon how you want to organize your bins and how you name your clips in Avid before making the proxy files. Keeping your media organized is the key to this process. In example, we can sort our original media into 4 bins, and we can make this process by creating proxy file for each of the rushes. So if you've got 4 camera cards, what I would do is have a bin for each of them so that you keep them together, okay? You select the clips that you want to transcode, right click, and then say consolidate transcode, select the hard drive that you want to put it to. Don't put it to the Mac HD drive, put it to one of the external drives. And then you've got, I keep it at full, or if it's transcode, you can do it at 1/4 resolution or 16th resolution. And like I say, you keep it at, if it's transcodes, you leave it at DNx HB. Now you've got other resolutions, so you've got Apple ProRes proxy files, but for Avid's purposes, I just leave it as a LB, okay? And then I just leave it, you can have it at full or high quality. If you're struggling, it's up to you. So you've got different quality when you're doing the transcode as well. And then you just hit transcodes and it'll go away, make copies of them, and then you can just drag them into your transcodes folder or bin. Your proxies will encode very slowly if you're accessing bins through a VPN. Make sure that convert video is checked, and next to the raster dimension, you can also select 1/4 size. So they're smaller files. Rather than the full resolution files, they're 1/4 the size, especially if you're working on 4K footage. And you can also automatically set up to DNx HRLB, which means low band or low quality. This used to be called, in the previous version of Avid, the 2018 version, it used to be called DNx 36. Okay, so the smaller the number, the more compressed the files, basically. And there it just shows you how you can transcode it. So it says if it's grey, you can then just reselect the hard drive to make sure that you're transcoding the footage onto a new hard drive. Again, I would use an external hard drive to do this. Don't use the Mac HD drive. Don't put them on your internal drive, because what will happen, it'll fill and fill and fill, and then eventually your whole computer will crash because it's got no processing power to work with. Avid will begin the process of transcoding new copies of your file in your media at a lower resolution. You should not interrupt this process. Your new proxy files will be saved to the following folder on the target drive. They're stored in the Avid Media Files MXF1. Wait until the Avid is finished transcoding before making any changes. You can rename the file to 1. Put the originals as 1 and then 2 as the proxy file. So you've got 2 separate folders for the different versions. So 1's the original media and 2's the proxy files. And then in order to swap between the original media and your proxies, you need to put these into separate bins. So you make a new bin. We advise you to use the same name that you did with the proxy, with proxy added at the end. So it's the same name, say like scene 1, but it's like scene 1 proxies, okay? And then you repeat the process for the rest of your rushes. And then once you've done that, you can then start editing with your proxies at the lower resolution. And if you want to, you can replace the footage with the proxy footage. In order to do this, you must keep your proxies and your original media into separate bins. So you keep your original media in one bin and your proxies in another bin. Then you can move your sequences into their own bin without any of the other footage. You can then close your bins, and then the closed bin icon looks like this on the screen, and it looks like a closed drawer. Next, we need to highlight our proxy clips in each of the bin. This is how Avid will know which clips are proxies. One by one, open each proxy bin and press Command A or Control A if you're on a PC. And then you can do this with every proxy bin and leave them open. You can double check that you did not open any other bins with original media, and now open your sequence, right click and say relink, and then it will relink the files to the proxy files. Things to consider when you're relinking are that you make sure that you've selected all the open bins, which are the proxy files, that you've used the timecode start, that you've used tape name or source name, not source file ID, that you've unchecked match case when comparing source names, that the tracks that you want to relink, you select them, so the video and the audio files, and you create a new sequence which is checked as well. And you need to also allow relinking across rates. If you've done this correctly, Avid will then make a copy of your sequence using the proxy file, and it will rename it relinked. You can then tell that it's successful if the clip names in your sequence were matched with the proxies. For example, your proxy may be labeled as .new. We basically advise you to put relinked on the sequence itself, so you know that's the low resolution one, or you can put proxy next to it, so you know which one's a high resolution, which one's a low resolution. So the low resolution is the one I'm going to be editing with. And then once you've edited it, you can then replace the proxy sequence with your high resolution footage. So you'll need to replace the proxy footage with the original high resolution before your final export. To do this, you follow the same steps as before, but with the original bins. You close all the bins containing the proxy media. And next, we need to highlight all the original clips in each bin. And this is how Avid knows which clips are going to be used to relink to the high resolution footage. One by one, you open each of the original media file bins and select Command A to highlight every clip. You then do this with each of the original media and leave them open. So leave the bins open. Once you've opened your sequence bin, you can right-click your sequence and select relink, and then what it will do is relink to the high-resolution files. So as long as you haven't changed the time code or you haven't renamed the files, it will then relink to the high-resolution files. And again, like we did before, you check all these settings, that you've used start time code, that you've matched case when comparing names, that you've selected all the free files to link to, and you selected create new sequence. So if you've done all this correctly, Avid will make another new copy of your sequence, and you can use the original media and labeled it relinked. You can tell that it was successfully relinked if the clip names in the sequence say new. So you know that they're now linked to the high resolution rather than the low resolution proxies. And then what you can do is you can rename the sequences. So you can have one called relinked or original media, and then you can create one with the high res sequence. So you've got the two versions, the offline version and the online version. And if you want to know more about using Blackmagic to do the transcodes, there's a really good website that goes through this process. So let's talk about how the industry's changed with remote editing. Due to COVID, it's pushed more post-production into the cloud. So it's pushed more into remote editing. Basically, within the next 12 to 18 months, there's going to be a lot more hybrid working. So there's going to be people working remotely from home and people working in the post house. Now, there's some things like offline editing or film editing that you can do remotely. However, there's certain things like online in sound dubbing and color grading, you kind of need to be in an edit suite because of the cost of the equipment. But for the fact that you can do a lot of offline editing now remotely has changed the industry completely, because I could be working on a film in China, in Europe, and I could be editing it in Scotland, and you could be got the rushes over in China or wherever. So using cloud devices has really helped in terms of inclusivity, in terms of diversity, and making more people aware that we can now do this remotely. Because some of the barriers for people with disability were the fact that they couldn't get into facility houses because, one, the transport systems were quite bad, and two, a lot of post houses were in basements, which obviously were not designed for wheelchairs. So the fact that we're doing more remote has really opened up, and it's made the industry more inclusive. So here's a workflow or a gang chart of how they're actually doing this on big productions now. What they have on sets is these big RAID drives, which are big hard drives, and you have what are known as dailies workstations. So in the film industry and TV industry, what they do is create what is known as dailies. So every day they shoot is known as a daily. And what they then do is give that to the editor to then start assembling the film together. So what you've got here is the fact that you'll have the dailies, then you'll have the sync sound. And what the first thing to do is to sync up the video with the audio and then transcode it to an edit-friendly codec, which we've just been talking about in terms of transcodes and proxy files. And then that can be sent to a cloud server, and then the editor can work remotely. Also, they might on set apply what is known as a LUT or a lookup table or a CPL, which is basically a color processing list. So they can actually put looks onto the footage before they give it to you. So they can actually bake that into the files while they're doing the transcodes. I tend not to like working with that because I want to grade afterwards, but some people do. So sometimes they will actually bake in a look for the editor to work with, okay? And again, they will then give them the look and then give them the transcodes. This is a bigger way of doing it. So on some big productions, you'll have several editing workstations. Again, you'll have shared storage, but you also have a backup on site. So you have a hard drive on site, but also shared storage in the cloud. And also you might have assistant workstations, and they will be basically logging the footage before giving it to the editor. Then once they've logged it and they've sunk it, they give it to the editor, who will then build the rough cut. Then they will add any visual effect shots. And then finally, they will match back to the original camera media and then refine the cut, lock the cut, and then it's off to sound. If you're interested in this new technology, some of the systems I would look at are things like Parsec, Teradici, also known as HPZ Central, Sonic Wall mobile connections, Splashtop, I've used that on several productions, AnyDesk, Evercast, and finally, Avid have got their own one called Avid On Demand. So these are the different systems that you're using. So have a look at these if you're considering doing remote editing. Obviously, some of them cost more than others, depending on the footage and depending on the storage that you need. And then finally, 8 top tips that I would suggest if you're going to go into a remote editing workflow. So the first thing is that you might need some accessories. So if I'm working from home, one thing I might need if I'm working on my laptop is an external monitor, because I like to work off a big monitor because I want to see what I'm doing. And if you've got a small laptop, it's very hard to see if stuff is in focus. So one good top tip is to purchase or invest in an external monitor. There's loads about, there's lots that are in HQ and high quality, but the one that I tend to go for is a company called BenQ. They produce some brilliant monitors. Again, what I would invest in is a color-coded keyboard. So I've got one for Avid and one for Premiere. And the place to go to for there is a company called Editor's Keys. Have a look on there, and they sometimes do good deals where they will sell some old stock and you'll get it at a good discount price. Another important thing is a good chair. So you need a good office chair. And again, if you're working in a basement, you might need to have a lamp. And obviously, you don't want any glare from windows. So what I tend to do, if I'm working remotely, I tend to block off any daylight if I can, because I want to basically get rid of some of the natural light, even though I need the natural light, but sometimes when you're editing, you need to actually focus on the rushes. The other thing to be aware of is, obviously, if you're working remotely, you need good internet speed. So what I tend to do is try and get as high internet as possible. I try not to use the Wi-Fi because you'll get sometimes dropouts. So what I would invest in is what is known as an Ethernet cable. So you can then attach the Ethernet cable directly from your laptop or computer straight into your server or your modem, so that you can get a constant feed when you're doing transcodes and when you're working with rushes. So that's another good top tip, is get an Ethernet cable. Then they're not expensive at all. Number 3 is use proxy files or use transcodes, which are low resolution offline copies of your media files. Using the proxy will help with conserving the bandwidth and makes remote video editing much more feasible for teams. When you're working with large file sizes like 4K, 6K, and 8K, unless you've got a really, really high spec computer, you're going to struggle editing it. So then this is when you need to work with your proxy or low resolution files. If you've got security issues, you could connect the storage via a VPN. So a VPN is a virtual private network. It's a safe and secure way to access a private network like your studio network over a public network at home. Also, you could use a VPN if you're in an airport, so it's a secure line. If you're remote working, say anywhere, basically, if you're in the car or you're remote in the airport, you can use the VPN. So it's a secure way of working with your material. The most important thing is housekeeping and making sure you standardize your bins and folder structure to make remote editing much easier for further collaboration. So sometimes I might be working with several other editors. So the bin structure and the file structure is so important because other editors may need to share your bins and share the rushes together. You should sync back to the original shared online storage. So when you've finished your offline edit, you can then relink your offline proxy files to the shared storage for final export. Any media that hasn't been uploaded to the shared storage, say a music track you added at the last moment, will be offline. So to avoid this, you need to make sure that you sync up or upload all of your files regularly. So what could happen is if you've been working remotely, but you've imported audio files like music files, but then they're not in the server, what's going to happen is when they relink back, all that music's going to go offline. So you have to make sure that you've made a copy of that music and you sent that with the original rushes, because otherwise they're not going to have it. And you're going to have all these tracks without any music at all. So that's very important. The next one is ask what is the best shared storage for your own needs. So there's lots of options. One I use is called Lucid Link, where you've got a virtual hard drive and I can share that link, which is an application, with other people. They can upload material to that and then I can download it. So that's a really good one. Google Drive is a standard one. A lot of people using Google Drive for editing. And in facility houses, they have big, what are known as Nexus drives, which are big, basically hard drives to store the rushes. So the other thing to be aware is understand how to connect to these drives and what can be the pitfalls. The final thing I want to talk about is that in remote working, communication is key. As I might be working in Scotland and you might be in Europe or China or wherever, we have to have a good communication basis. So setting up a WhatsApp group or setting up a Slack would be really, really good. Sometimes with emails, you can miss emails and then you don't know what the latest cut is. So you need to make sure that you're both on the same wavelength. So you make sure that you know how your cuts are going. So you can use things like Vimeo, YouTube. One that's really good is Frame.io if you want to have a look into that. What Frame.io does, it allows you and the producer or director to make comments or make changes, and that will automatically update in your sequence in your nonlinear editing software. It's one I've been using. It's a great one. Or if you've got big files, have a look at WeTransfer. There's a free version and there's a paid version, depending on the size of files that you're going to be sharing. Very important that you make sure that you label your cuts and it's just not called sequence one. You need to know that that is a version. So what I do is version each of my sequence. So I'll go version 1, version 2, version 3. And in theory, the latest version should be the one that I'm working on. And it's very important when you're working with other editors or you're working with people remotely that you label everything so everyone knows what the version that you're working on.
I have a quick question. So when you are working off Lucid Link, is it recommended to have VPN on all the time while you're editing?
No, because it can slow it down. That's the problem. It's only when you're transferring the stuff I could put it on, and when I'm working, you don't really need it on. Yeah.
So when is it exactly it's recommended to have VPN on? So when you are receiving,
or when you're bringing stuff in. So when you're bringing stuff in or when you're exporting, I would leave it on. When I'm just editing away, when I'm not actually I'm working self-contained, I don't really need to have it on, sort of thing. So yeah. One thing very important is always when you're working on a big production, always have 2 copies of the rushes. So you have a copy and you have a copy in the cloud, or you have a copy in the directors, or the guy that's done the DIT's got a copy. So it's very, very important, even as an editor, that I make sure that there's a backup of the cars, because technically it's the assistant's job, but if stuff goes missing or stuff thingies, the first person they're going to moan at is me, sort of thing. So I always make sure that there's always 2 backups of the rushes, sort of thing.
Right.
They don't always tell you that at film school or college, but it's a thing that you need to do, because otherwise, worst scenario is they reuse the camera card and then you've got no backup of it.
I cut the short film in Avid just to get my head around how the software works, and I made the mistake to delete the linked
Yes,
PDF.
don't link. So this is what you've got to do. If you're doing linked media, you either have to import the rushes or you transcode, so you've got a physical card. Because if you've got linked and you get rid of the link, it's all going to go media offline. So what you need to do is you need to work on transcode. So first thing I would do is link all my rushes, go to the bin, right click and say create transcode, and then you've got copies, and then they can take that camera card or whatever away, and then you've still got the version. And then what you can do once you've finished it, you can, as long as you've got a link to it, you can relink back to the original master files. But like I say, don't rename the files, because it won't. If you start renaming files, it's okay in the Avid itself, but in the actual folder system within the hard drives, don't do that, because then what will happen, it'll go, that's called that file, it's disappeared. And it's not, it's still there, but someone's renamed it. And I used to be the only assistant for 15 editors when I started out, and people would do that all the time. Then I had to look by date and file name to try and relink, and it's a nightmare, because you have to then physically go through and try and do it. So yeah, my advice in that situation would be either import the rushes or do transcodes.
Huge thanks to Nigel for a really
Thank
interesting
you.
talk that's taken on us through a great journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nigel, and thank you for coming, everybody. Lovely to see.
My Labrador's thanking you as well.
Yeah.